Well, thank you for joining me in this out-of-home experience. The talk is The Spear of Destiny in History and Legend, and I'm Jerry E. Smith. My previous book was Harp, The Ultimate Weapon of the Conspiracy. It came out in Portuguese from a Brazilian publisher last year, and a few years ago it came out in Polish. David tells me I'm the number 5 best-selling author at AUP, so that makes me only jealous of 4 others. My co-author in Secrets of the Holy Lance is George Picard, whose previous book was Liquid Conspiracy, JFK, LSD, the CIA, Area 51, and UFOs. It's about the aftermath of Operation Paperclip. Operation Paperclip at the end of World War II brought Nazi spy masters and rocket scientists to the U.S., who we believe used us something like a petri dish and cultured themselves, turning the Third Reich into the Fourth. George is also the leader of I call them a pre-apocalyptic rock band called the Atomics. You may have heard about The Spear of Destiny from Trevor Ravenscroft. His book, The Spear of Destiny, was a multi-million bestseller in the early 1970s. Trevor was a college professor, apparently also something of an occultist. The book is largely about his initiation into the occult and Adolf Hitler's initiation into the occult, and by extension, the reader's initiation into the occult. We cover a number of occult facets, but we don't go into it quite the way he did. He spent most of his book discussing the past lives of the Nazi elite and who they were 1,000 years earlier, and we leave that to your imagination. Now, the legend of the spear, and again, our book, The Spear of Destiny in History and Legend, is one of the first things we tried to do, is we tried to nail down the whole legend of the spear. And there's several objects, a wide, strange legend that has grown from it. One of the keys of it is that quote, "Whosoever possesses this holy lance and understands the powers it serves, holds in his hand the destiny of the world for good or evil." And I've done a number of radio shows on this, and one of the hosts always asks, so what are the powers? What can this thing do for you? And there have been numerous wielders of the spear over the last 2,000 years, and many of them showed invincibility in battle. Some had clairvoyance, that is the ability to see spiritual things, such as Constantine's famous vision. Clairaudience, the voice, the spear speaks to them. Precognition, being able to see events before they take place. Charlemagne claimed that the spear gave him precognition. That he didn't use that word, of course, but he said that it allowed him to see battles before they happened. And so with the spear, he won 49 out of 49 battles. And guidance from the power the lance serves. There are a number of these folks who have had clairaudience have received instruction and guidance. And I'll be getting that, I'm quite sure. Now, how does it have these powers? It's because it is a relic. And here we have a quote, I'm not sure, ooh, that didn't come out so good. It's, "So Elijah died and they buried him. Now bands of Moabites used to invade the land in the spring of the year. And as a man was being buried, lo, a marauding band was seen, and the man was cast into the grave with Elijah. And as soon as the man touched the bones of Elijah, he revived and stood on his feet." That's an example of the power of a relic. The concept of relics is universal. Virtually every religion on this planet has an idea of relics. And it's not just that the relic is a memento of the holy man or saint or God, but is actually imbued with some of the power that made that person into a holy man. And this particular relic that we're going to be talking about is a relic of the Passion of the Christ. This is from the Gospel of John, and the key phrase, "But one of the soldiers with the spear pierced his side, and forthwith came out blood and water." And you see the soldier piercing the side of the Christ with his spear. The Christian legend goes on to say that this soldier was Gaius Cassius Longinus. He was sainted for it. Gaius Cassius is turned up in literature, in religious works, the Gospel of Nicodemus, the Acts of Pilate, and more recently, Japanese anime. And this one over here, this is Barry Sadler, the guy who wrote the song, The Ballad of the Green Berets. He wrote 21 novels about Longinus, who was cursed to walk the earth until the second coming. Now, there are several objects that are claimed to be the Spear of Longinus, or the Spear of the Christ, or the Holy Lance. These are based on the stories of where he went after the crucifixion. One of the stories is that he stayed in Jerusalem and achieved Christian martyrdom in the Holy Land, and that his spear was taken to the Vatican. Another version is that he went to Armenia, and there is a spear there. There's another story that he went to the British Isles, and that spear ended up today in Vienna. And there's a replica of that in Krakow, Poland. And there may indeed be another spear hidden in Europe today. Now, the Armenian spear, this is the monastery in which it's kept. You notice that this doesn't resemble a spear very much. In fact, everybody who's seen it says, well, it's a flagpole top, it's a standard head. How they mistake this for a spear is beyond me. The story goes that this was discovered in Antioch in the 1400s, that an army of crusaders were in or about one of the towns around Antioch. They were surrounded by a much larger Muslim force. They expected to be wiped out, and one of the crusaders named Bartholomew, now Saint Bartholomew, said that St. Andrew came to him in a dream and told him that the spear of the Christ was buried in the floor of the church at Antioch, and all they had to do was dig up the floor and they'd find it. Well, they spent all day digging up the floor, didn't find it. The leader of the Crusaders is about to put Bartholomew to the sword for wasting their time, and Bartholomew goes, "Oh, wait a minute, I know where it is," and he walks over and picks it up. And that apparently is this object. Now, the one that's in the Vatican, this is a little easier to read. In 1492, the Sultan, and I cannot pronounce that, I won't even try, sent the Holy Lance to Pope Innocent the Eighth, as part of the ransom paid for his brother, possibly Schism, who was then the Pope's prisoner. This relic has never left Rome, where it is preserved under the Dome of St. Peter's. That's a quote from the Catholic Encyclopedia. The story goes that when the previous Sultan, who was the head of all of Islam, died, he left two sons and no clear successor to his throne. And the two sons had a battle, a war with each other over who was going to be the next Sultan. One won and one lost. The loser, Schism, bugged out and went over to the Christians. And he was, you may know that the Knights Templar or the Templar Knights are also known as the Hospitaller Knights of St. John. And since they're the Hospitaller Knights, they gave him hospitality. The problem was that they quickly realized that he was too hot a potato to handle, and they packed him off to Rome and gave him to the Pope. Well, by this time, his brother realizes, oh my gosh, he could spill an awful lot of beans I don't want spilt, and bought his brother back, and in fact paid one of the largest ransoms in human history. It was a small mountain of gold, precious jewels, and just to sweeten the deal, he threw in the Holy Lance. Now, that Holy Lance that he had acquired by sacking Jerusalem in the 800s, and it had been passed down from sultan to sultan, so the story was. What I understand of that spear today, after the Pope got it in the 1400s, for the next couple hundred years, there was a great deal of argument over whether it was the real deal or not. Around the late 1600s, early 1700s, the Pope decided to put an end to all this nonsense, and they built a decorative throne with a decorative roof over it, and the roof is supported by 4 pillars, and they put the spear into one of the support pillars. And I'm under the impression they put some magic amulet or some magic object into each of the 4 pillars. And then there's the one we're most familiar with. And I've been practicing saying this for days now, and I probably won't get it right. There you go. We got it. We have some German people, and I'll let you folks who know how to say it say it. The one here on this is as it appears in Vienna today. It's on a velvet red dais that's at an angle about like this in a glass case. So when you come up, you see this is the back side of the case behind it here, and this is it taken apart. And it is in several pieces, and I'll get to the pieces here as we go along. But as you see, there is a nail that's embedded in it, and the nail is said to be a nail from the cross of Jesus. When they put the nail in it, they broke it, so a silver sheath was put over it to hold it together. And then a couple hundred years later, someone decided that the silver sheath wasn't fancy enough, so they put a gold sheath over it. And I'll detail those in a bit. Now, the way that one got to Vienna is that the story goes that Joseph Arimathea and Gaius Cassius Longinus became friends after the crucifixion. Gaius may have helped Joseph take Jesus to his crypt. These are some images of Joseph. Here you see Joseph and Mary. Now, they went to England, where it is believed that Joseph founded Glastonbury Abbey. And there's a local legend that this is the Hawthorn Tree. The Hawthorn Tree is not native to England, and the story goes that he planted his staff in the ground, and it turned into the Hawthorn Tree. Now, the first person to have the spear after Longinus was Queen Boadicea, who raised an army of Celts against the Romans. Notice that in all 4 images, she's holding the spear. She was the first one to lay down the track, if you will, that the spear gave invincibility. She fought many battles against the Romans, and in all of them, she was invincible. It wasn't until they took her in her sleep that they captured her. That they had failed to capture her. They may have received the spear. It's hard to say. After her, the spear goes into hiding for a couple of hundred years, and it turns up with Saint Maurice. Now, this is the town of Saint Maurice in Switzerland. The reason that town is named Saint Maurice is, you notice he's black. He was the first black man sainted. He was the leader of what is known as the Theban Legion, because they came from the Egyptian city of Thebes. They were all Christians, recruited into the legion in and around Thebes to be a Christian legion. There was an uprising in Gaul, and the Caesar, the Augustus of the West, at that point in time, the empire was ruled by 2 emperors, an emperor of the East and an emperor of the West. The emperor of the West was having a problem with an uprising, and he called on the Theban Legion to help him put the uprising down. And they sailed to Italy and then marched over the Alps. And in marching over the Alps, their tread was so thunderous that they became known as the Thundering Legion. When they got to the town of what is now the town of Saint Maurice, they camped and announced to Caesar that they were there. He was about 8 miles away, and he orders. I think at this point he has 5 legions prepared to put down this uprising, and he orders a festival be held to ask all the gods to come in on their side and assist in this. And there are several stories as to what happens next. One is that it was an uprising of Christians, and the Theban legion refused to kill other Christians. The other is that they were ordered to name Caesar God, and because they were Christians, they refused to name him God. Whatever it was, the Romans had an odd way of maintaining discipline in the ranks. It was called decimation. You may have heard of the word to decimate. It literally means to kill 1 in 10. Deca, 10. So the Caesar ordered, if you guys don't name me God, I'm going to order you decimated. And they go, okay. No, we can't do it. So he orders a decimation. And they joyously accept it. St. Maurice has the spear, waves the spear before them, reminds them that they're Christians, that they took a baptismal oath, that they cannot, as Christians, name him as God. They accept that that is their fate, draw lots, and kill each other, 1 in 10 dying. They send back to Caesar, okay, we've done it, and we're still not going to name you God. And Caesar flies into a rage and orders another decimation, which again, they do, joyously accepting Christian martyrdom, and send back to Caesar, okay, we've done a second one, we're still not going to name you God. At which point Caesar flips out and orders the entire legion decimated. Now, it's curious, they're not decimated, destroyed, obliterated, dead to the man. It's curious that the number recorded was that the legion was 6,660 men. I always thought that 666 rather interesting. There are now something like 700 churches in Europe named after St. Maurice, and several towns. This town is in Switzerland. It's St. Maurice. It's on the other side of the country from the world-famous ski town St. Moritz. But tourists get confused and occasionally show up in St. Maurice wondering where the bobsled run is. The next person who has it is Constantine the Great. Now, what George and I figured out, it looks to us like after Caesar wiped out the Theban legion, the spear was brought to him as a trophy. Constantine marries his youngest daughter, Fausta, and we believe that Caesar then gave the Spear of Destiny to Constantine as either a wedding gift or part of the bride's dowry. And from the moment he receives it, he has a sea change takes place for Roman Christians. Up to this moment in time, everywhere in the Roman Empire, it's illegal to be a Christian, and they do persecutions and prosecutions and throwing them to the lions and all this nonsense. And Constantine puts a stop to it. From the moment he gets the spear, the first thing he does is in his part of the Roman Empire. Now, by the time he comes up, the Roman Empire is now led by 4 Caesars, 2 senior Augusti and 2 junior Augusti. And his father is one of the junior Augustes. He and his father march on, well, there was a 5th emperor, a guy who had been the admiral of the navy of the Western Augusti. He breaks off and he makes England his personal piece of the empire and names himself as the 3rd Caesar. At which point the other 2 Caesars decide that doesn't fly and we got to take him out. So they bring up their favorite generals as co-Augusti, giving them 5. At which point the 2 Western Augusti go after father and son, also both named Constantine, which is a little confusing. Go after them, and near the current city of York, the elder Constantine dies, and his troops, at this point in time, it's very odd the way they selected emperors. The troops selected the emperors, and the troops named young Constantine as the replacement to his father, name him Junior Augusti. Well, the Emperor of the West's son is really ticked off that Constantine's dad got promoted over his head, and now Constantine gets promoted over his head. So he goes to Rome and takes over Rome and names himself emperor. So we've just gone from two emperors to 4 emperors to 5 emperors to 6 emperors. Meanwhile, while he's while Maximus is controlling Rome, he doesn't trust his general in Alexandria, orders his son to be brought to Rome as a hostage, at which point the guy in Alexandria declares himself emperor. Now we got 7 emperors. It gets really thick. I spent all last summer sorting out the politics of the 3rd century, and George and I had a really funny way of writing this book. I would write my chapters and pass them to George, and he would write his chapters and pass them to me. He wrote his chapters, and I added to them. I wrote my chapters, and he subtracted from them. So the Roman chapter that ends up in the book is about 35 pages shorter than the one I wrote. So luckily you won't be bogged down with the politics that I found incredibly fascinating. Now, Constantine, as I mentioned, had after receiving the spear, begins having metaphysical events. The first seems to be this desire to lighten up on the Christians, and then as he's marching on Rome to take out the Western Emperor's son, who has proclaimed himself the emperor, he has a vision, and this vision is that odd symbol that looks like a P and an X. That's the Shiro, or the, I wish I knew how to pronounce that. This symbol is the first 2 letters in the word Christ written in the Greek alphabet. He sees this in the sky and hears, with this sign you will conquer. Clairvoyance and clairaudience. You notice he has this thing made up, and this thing is marched before all of his armies from that day to the end of his rule. Shortly after that, he fought the Battle of Milvian Bridge, in which he took out his brother-in-law, who was claiming to be the emperor. And note that in this painting by Raphael, there are angels floating above his head, and he's holding the Holy Lance and is about to skewer his opponent. Shortly after arriving in Rome, the spear spoke to him and told him that Rome was not a good place to have his capital, that he needed to move his capital to this odd little town in Greece called Byzantium. So he moves it to Byzantium, and you may have heard the expression the Byzantine Empire. Byzantium goes on to become the capital of the eastern half of the Roman Empire for the next 1,400 years. He names it Nova Roma, New Rome. As he's laying out the streets in Nova Roma, he's carrying the spear with him, and as he's walking around, he's proclaiming loudly to anyone who will listen, "I am following in the footsteps of him who I see before me." He was seeing Jesus walking him around, pointing out, "Oh, we're going to put the square over here. We're going to build a cathedral over here." And indeed, this is the temple or cathedral of Sophia. That's the world's largest dome. Now that after he died, the people renamed it Constantinople, which it remained until it was overrun by the Muslims and is now Istanbul. Another thing he did with the spear was he called the Council of Nicaea. And the Council of Nicaea is the most important event in Christian history, save the crucifixion itself. And if you're a fan of Acharya, you know the crucifixion never occurred, so this is the most important thing in the history of Christianity. The Council of Nicaea was presided over by Constantine, sitting with the Holy Lance clutched to his bosom throughout the event. I'm thinking of 4 things at once, so I got to sort out which one I'm going to say. He, as the emperor, was the Pontifex Maximus. He was the supreme pontiff of the official Roman state religion, which was going in the tank at the time. Rome was awash in strange new religions, and the old official religion just was losing hand over fist to these other religions. He decided he had to salvage his control of the hearts and minds by creating a universal religion. You may remember the word Catholic means universal. So the purpose of the Council of Nicaea was to create the universal religion. And they brought together representatives from all of the religions in Rome. Mithra, Dionysius, Zoroaster, the whole lot were all brought there. And the purpose was to create this universal religion. A lot of people wonder why it is that Christianity doesn't talk about reincarnation. Well, Constantine saw to that. On the first day of the conference, they took a vote on whether or not this universal religion would discuss reincarnation. And after the vote, all those who voted yes, Constantine had taken out and killed. Now, after Constantine, it remained an heirloom, an artifact, a talisman of Imperial Rome for about 200 years, and had a number of folks possessed it. The last of Constantine's bloodline to possess it was Julian the Apostate. And Julian tried to do the exact dead opposite of what Constantine had done. He tried to go back to the old pagan religion, and Constantine had made Christianity the state religion, and Julian did the opposite. He laughed at the Holy Lance and died very young for it. Theodosius the Great was another one who was invincible in battle with it. He fought a battle that took 2 days. The first day, he got his tail whooped, and the next day he rides into the battle with the spear in his hand, shouting, "Where is the God of my father? Where is the God of the spear? Where is the God of Theodosius?" And a wind came up, and the wind was so strong that the chronicler of that battle said that it blew the swords of the enemies back into their faces. Another to hold it was King Alaric. Alaric had been a mercenary under Theodosius and saw the spear in use. Alaric's people were promised various things, a nice place to live, a dole, etc. And the Romans didn't come through on their promises. And Alaric got peeved and marched on Rome. Now, nobody had taken Rome for 800 years, and the Romans felt that they didn't have a problem. Well, Alaric knew about the spear, and Theodosius had put the spear on display in Milan. Theodosius then died, and his son was left ruling, and his son was the one who reneged on all the deals. His son is in Milan, bails, and leaves the spear there. Alaric goes to Milan, gets the spear, and with it takes Rome. Later, there was Attila the Hun. Attila the Hun was paid not to take Rome. The Pope offered him a huge ransom to leave the city unmolested, and as it happened back, as happened with the other spear, the Pope threw in the Holy Lance to sweeten the deal. Attila gets all this wealth, passes it to his people, and then as he's riding away, he takes the spear out, rides back to the gates of Rome, throws it in the dust at their feet, and says, "Take back your spear. I know not him who makes it holy." The last Roman emperor to possess and use the spear was Justinian. And he claimed the spear spoke to him and told him basically the Bible was the only book anybody ever needed to read, and ordered all the Hellenistic schools closed. Any school that was teaching anything other than what was in the Bible was shut. This gave us the Dark Ages. Also, Justinian really did not like being only the emperor of the eastern half of the empire. He wanted the whole damned empire, which the western half had been lost over 150 years earlier, and it took a considerable amount of effort, of battles, to win back. And the people who were on the western half, of course, didn't want to be in the empire and struggled And as soon as he was dead, they bailed. Now, while he's fighting these endless wars in the West, he has at his back the Persians, who are becoming the Muslims. And throughout the Roman Empire, they had always had a problem with their neighbors, the Persians, and they had constantly been engaging in border skirmishes and wars. And he decided the solution to his problem was to pay them to shut up and sit down, which worked. The only problem is that meant that he funneled a great deal of money into the Muslims. And not only did he give us the Dark Ages, but he also gave us a well-financed, rich Muslim empire to deal with. For some reason, the Catholics think he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. And if you go to the Catholic Encyclopedia, they'll tell you that he was the greatest of all the emperors. Anybody not a Catholic says he was the worst of all the emperors. And then it disappears for a couple of hundred years and turns up in the hands of Charlemagne. Now, Charlemagne was the king of the Franks, and the Franks were the people who gave us the modern countries of France and Germany. And the Franks were two major divisions of Franks, the Merovingians and the Carolingians. Charlemagne was the king of the Carolingians, and in order to become the king of the Franks, he had to take out the king of the Merovingians. And if you saw the Matrix movies, you know that one of the characters was the Merovingian. It's kind of a tip of the hat. And there have been all these stories. If you're familiar with Holy Blood, Holy Grail, and the Da Vinci Code, there are these stories that Jesus did, in fact, marry Mary Magdalene, did have children, that the Holy Grail was not a cup used at the Last Supper, it was, in fact, the bloodline of Jesus, yada yada. So the story goes is that the Merovingians claim to be descended of Jesus. The Merovingian king had a tribal spear, that when he possessed the spear, he had power of life or death over all the Franks. Charlemagne one-ups the tribal spear with the Jesus spear. In 2003, Dr. Robert Feather, a British metallurgist and Bible scholar, and we sell one of his books at the bookstore, did an analysis, a metallurgical study of the spear of the Holy Lance in Vienna, and concluded that it was forged in the 6th or 7th century. It was used to crown Charlemagne, the first emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, on Christmas Day, 800 AD. We believe that it was a con from the get, that Charlemagne just concocted his version of the Holy Lance as a way to one up his predecessor. However, the one in Vienna did have supernatural powers, or at least wise, it's reported to have had supernatural powers. So George and I have been trying to figure out for a year now how it got those powers, if it didn't actually pierce the Christ. And I came up with a couple ideas, and you folks can think about this if you feel like it. This object was mostly on display for the last 800 years, or it has been on 1,200 years. 1,200 years it's been on display. Millions of people a year have looked at this thing and believed it had power. Are we just hunks of meat, or are we spirits? Are we souls? As spirit, do we have power? If you're familiar with psychometry, you know that a psyche can take your pocket watch or your wedding ring and tell you a great deal about you. Particularly if you're dead, they can tell you how you died and who killed you. Psychometry is a recognized aspect of the paranormal. Now, if just an average Joe carrying a pocket watch around for 20 years can believe an imprint on it, what happens when you have 1 million people a year for 1,200 years looking at an object and believing it has certain powers? Then again, there's the other thing. Remember that the legend of the spear is, whosoever possesses this holy lance and understands the powers it serves holds in his hand the destiny of the world. Are there powers? A Gallup poll taken last Christmas found that now this is plus or minus 3%, 98% of Americans believe in the God of the Bible. 85% of Americans believe in angels. 65% believe in devils, and 40 to 45% believe in ghosts. These are powers, these are entities, these are spirits who are not a body, but affect our world. What if you have this object that's believed to be a porthole for the supernatural and serves a power? What if one of these powers wanders along, sees it, and goes, oh, they want a power? I'll give them a power. Now, that's what Trevor Ravenscroft's book was largely about. Trevor Ravenscroft analyzed the effects of this object on its possessors and concluded that the Antichrist was reaching through the spear to affect people. And while working on this book, if you read The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, I kept seeing parallels between the One Ring, Sauron's ring, which was originally concocted with half of Sauron's soul in it, and the spear. That both had very interesting phenomenality. The ring spoke to Frodo, and the ring gave Frodo visions. Also, H.P. Lovecraft, the great horror novel. A lot of his short stories were about how people would find the spell books, particularly the Necronomicon, and cast a spell to open a dimension, open a door to another dimension where something evil would come through and eat them. And we definitely see, Trevor Ravenscroft, George, and I see that something evil came through and ate Hitler, and I'll get there in a moment. So Henry IV, the third Holy Roman Emperor, added the nail, and in adding the nail, he had the blood groove carved out, which created two splinters, and weakened it so that he put the nail in and then had the silver sheath added to hold it together. Of the splinters, they were made into crude copies. One was given to the King of Poland, one was given to the King of Hungary. The Hungarian one is lost. The Polish one is in a museum in Krakow, Poland today. One of the famous wielders was Barbarossa. Hitler believed he was a reincarnation of Barbarossa and named one of his houses Barbarossa, and the surprise attack on the USSR was named Operation Barbarossa. Barbarossa was the king of Swabia, and this will come up in a moment. Charles IV found the spear. After Barbarossa, the spear disappears again for about 50 to 100 years and is found in an abbey in the Tyrol. Charles sees the silver sheath and the nail and says, yeah, this has got to be the real deal, and adds the gold sheath over it. One of his descendants is Sigismund. Gotta love that hat. Sigismund has another experience with the spear. The spear tells him, I do not feel safe here, and his capital was in Prague. And he orders it taken from Prague to St. Catherine's Cathedral in Nuremberg, and where it was on display for 400 plus years in Nuremberg. And it remained in Nuremberg until, and when it went to Nuremberg, it went with the entire imperial regalia, which included a number of art objects, a number of spears, crowns. If you notice that the Charlemagne picture back there had that crown on it. And while it's on display in Nuremberg, it accrues a veritable Ripley's Believe It or Not of religious artifacts, a shin bone from St. Anne, a thumb from John the Baptist, a piece of cloth that's supposedly the tablecloth from the Last Supper, a piece of wood that's supposedly from the manger that the baby Jesus slept in. And all these things are in Nuremberg until Napoleon marches on Nuremberg. And by this time, everybody in Europe knew you're invincible in battle, you have all these mystical powers. And the people in Nuremberg absolutely flipped out because they thought with it, Napoleon would rule the world. So they gave it to a nobleman and told him to get it out, to hide it, to keep Napoleon from getting it. And he did. This was at the end of the 1700s, and a few years later, the Holy Roman Empire ceases to exist. And the nobleman goes, cool, I don't have to give it back. He then sells it to the Habsburgs, who put it in their museum in Vienna, where it may be today. maybe because we got a wild tale, and I have the feeling I'm not going to get to tell it. It was in that museum where Adolf Hitler first saw it, probably at about the age 18 or 19. When he saw it, he too had a mystical experience. It was a cold, blustery autumn day. He was very despondent. He'd been painting in the plaza in front of it, just got fed up, ripped up his scrapbook, his sketchbook, and went into the museum, wandering in the museum until he comes, he just finds himself in a room, and he's stopped by, there's a tour group coming through, and the tour group leader brings him to the case that the Holy Lance is in, and tells the story of the Holy Lance, tells the legend. Whosoever possesses this Holy Lance and understands the powers it serves holds in his hand the destiny of the world for good or evil, and leads the group on. And Hitler goes, "What?" and walks over to the case, and as he's looking at it, he's transported. He has a past life recall in which he sees himself, remembers himself as one of the kings of the First Reich, one of the kings of the Holy Roman Empire, holding the spear, using it as his personal talisman of power, using it to rule the Reich with. Hitler comes back to himself, a scruffy teenager dressed in rags, living in a flop house, looking at this object and goes, "What the heck just happened to me?" He then goes on a search for an understanding of what just happened to him, which led him into the occult. And I'm not going to tell you that part because George wrote that part of the book, so you have to read the book and get what George tells you. Now, Hitler got it with the Anschluss. The Anschluss was the annexation, the unification of Austria to Greater Germany. And he received it on the fourth day at a state dinner in which it was brought to him. And the story goes that you had this huge dining hall with everybody in their best clothing at the royal palace, the official state dinner to welcome the savior. And in comes a group of black-suited SS, and they line up along one wall, and everybody stops, and the leader snaps his heels, clicks his heels together. Must have gone off like a gunshot in there. Everybody is. The colonel announces, "Mein Führer, the Holy Lance." And Hitler gets up, and they meet in the middle of the room, and Hitler goes down on one knee. The colonel dubs him with it, just like a knight being knighted, passes it to him, and the story goes is that Hitler spent an hour with it alone, comes back to the dinner. The dinner goes on like nothing had happened. Everybody's weirded out by this. The spear then goes to either, and there's many stories here at this point. Nobody really knows exactly what happened. The entire Reich treasure is sent on a special train from back to Nuremberg, where it goes back on display. Except perhaps Hitler kept the spear on his person for the next 8 months before sending it back to Nuremberg. But it may not have gotten back to Nuremberg because there was another player. Before I go on to the other player, that same year, 1938, Germany also annexed Antarctica. The German Antarctic expedition went down to, and you see where those flags are, that's New Schwabenland. Remember, Frederick Barbarossa was from Swabia. This is New Swabia. They had these aircraft that launched from, the ship is the Schwabenland. The aircraft, the Schwabenland was used in transatlantic mail. And a plane would fly from Germany to it in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It would land in the water, be picked up, refueled, and then launched from the catapult off the deck to continue on to New York. They then repositioned this thing in Antarctica, and they overflew Antarctica. They took 11,000 photographs and dropped thousands of Nazi flags and poles with the logo of the expedition on it, claiming New Schwabenland for the Reich. 3 days later, Norway claimed exactly the same territory and named it Queen Maud or Droning Maud Land. So if you look at a map of Antarctica, some of them will say New Schwabenland, most of them say Queen or Droning Maud Land. Here is another shot. What they found there was large areas that were ice-free. They found large areas with signs of vegetation. And when this got back to headquarters in Berlin, Berlin was, wow, maybe we could start a colony there. Maybe we could actually have real full-time investiture there. Now, the other player I mentioned was Heinrich Himmler. Heinrich Himmler was, if anything, more obsessed with the Holy Lands than Hitler was. Heinrich Himmler, in 1935, created a mock-up of the lance, which he then used in occult ceremonies. He also found himself, okay, you're familiar with Indiana Jones and the search for the Lost Ark. Well, that was Himmler. Himmler was searching for the Lost Ark. He was also searching for the entrance to the inner earth, Shambhala, Agartha, Shangri-La. The SS worldview included that the earth was hollow, that there was a race of incredibly ancient, powerful, wise people, and they were trying to make contact with them. Himmler found this castle. Note that there's a couple of views of it from the air there. It's the only three-sided castle in Europe. He took over this castle and turned it into a Holy Lance castle, in which every room in the castle was appointed with objects from the time period of a previous possessor of the lance, and also items owned by the previous possessor of the lance. The Charlemagne room had objects actually owned by Charlemagne in it. If this were a private museum on display today, it would be incredibly expensive. Probably the most expensive museum in the world with all the crazy artifacts in it that were looted by the Nazis over the time period. Notice the tourists. It now is a tourist destination for those with a somewhat kinky sense of tourism, because in this castle he engaged in occult magic, black magic, using his mock-up of the spear. And it's possible, there is a story that when Hitler sent the lance to Nuremberg, it didn't make it. That it went to Wiebelsberg, where the greatest swordsmaker in Japan had been brought, and they made an exact replica of the lance, and the replica went to Nuremberg, and then on to Vienna, where it is today. And the real one stayed there until the very last days of the war and was sent to Antarctica. Inside Wiebelsberg, this is a view inside. This is his chair, and you'll notice it's covered in magic symbols. And that's one of the reception rooms upstairs where ceremonies took place. The chamber downstairs in the basement where they did the black magic is now sealed off. Now, the story that it went to Antarctica was told by Colonel Howard Buckner. Dr. Buckner has wrote over 240 medical textbooks. He was in World War II. That's a picture of him in 1945 as a first lieutenant in Munich. He was a battalion surgeon during the war. When he came back from the war, he went on to teach at Tulane and LSU, and he taught medicine. And wrote books on not just medicine, but also art history. And he had been he had witnessed the Dachau massacre. When the U.S. Army liberated Dachau prison, the first thing they did is they rounded up all the German employees, all the German guards, and put them in a safe place, and then went into the prison to see what was going on. And the U.S. Army guys were so offended by what they saw, they went back and shot all the Germans. This upset Dr. Buckner. Dr. Buckner wrote a book on it, It came out around the mid-'80s. Shortly after he wrote that book, he was approached by a German submariner who said that he had been part of, now this is the U-530, and one of the people in this picture may have been the guy who contacted Dr. Buchner. They gave him the pseudonym of Wilhelm Bernhardt. They admit that it's a pseudonym because they don't want to reveal who he was or which of the several submarines he was on. There were 2 submarines that surrendered to Argentine authorities months after the war's end, with very implausible stories as to why they had been wandering around for several months after the war was over without, and then just show up. And they showed up at Mar del Plata. You see, Buenos Aires and then Mar del Plata. That little town, that's where Hitler and the supreme Nazis who got away moved to. I have Hitler's home address in the book, which I think is so cool. This is the prime meridian, 0 degrees. This is Zulu time. You take the prime meridian and go straight south, and you're in New Schwabenland. Here, there's the Antarctic Peninsula, which if you go up the peninsula, you end up here in Tierra del Fuego. And that's where they surrendered at Mar del Plata. Now, this is an artist rendering of the Antarctic Reich. There have been stories since 1940 that the Germans were building a colony in Antarctica. And the stories, as stories do, with every retelling, it gets wilder and wilder. According to Pravda, in 2003, there are now between 2 and 3 million Nazis living in the capital, New Berlin, and that New Berlin stretches for hundreds of miles underneath the Antarctic ice and has an alien quarter in which space aliens from Zeta Reticuli and the Pleiades hang out. Now, the story goes that the Antarctic Reich was Rudolf Hess was the foreign minister. If anybody would have been in charge of it, it would have been Rudolf Hess. Rudolf Hess, you know, at some point took a rather odd leave of absence and flew to Germany, flew from Germany to England, and quite literally bailed on the whole Third Reich thing by bailing out of his plane, landing into a farmer's field, and demanding to be taken to Churchill. Churchill never talked to him, but MI5 did, MI6 did, and they concluded that he was stone crazy. Perhaps he was, and maybe he was actually telling them the truth, and the truth was just too weird. Notice this is supposedly one of the official photographs taken by Allies. That is a car behind a disc aircraft. This is a picture of one of the many underground factories. In the last half of the war, the Germans realized that the best way to keep their factories from getting bombed is you put them underground. And they had over 100 square miles underground. And they may have had another underground base in Antarctica. Now, in 1946-47, the U.S. may have gone looking for it. This is Operation High Jump. It was described as a training mission. 13 ships, including a brand new state-of-the-art aircraft carrier, the Philippine Sea, a submarine, the USS Senate, 3 destroyers, in all 4,700 men, including 3,500 Marines in full battle dress. This was not a scientific mission. This was a war mission, and they may have been sent to find and liquidate the Antarctic Reich should it exist. That may be what Admiral Byrd encountered. That is a Nazi disc aircraft. We sell a couple of books on Nazi disc aircraft, man-made UFOs. 1944, 1994, 50 Years of Suppression, and Hitler's Flying Saucers. I highly recommend that you pick them up at the bookstore. Now, did Admiral Byrd contact these things? Did he lose planes to them? Admiral Byrd, on the way back from Antarctica, this is very peculiar. The Operation High Jump was supplied with enough stuff to keep them down there for 8 months. They were there 16 weeks and suddenly, mysteriously pulled anchor and got the hell out of there. And nobody knows why. There's never been an official explanation as to why they just suddenly bailed. Now, Admiral Byrd, on his flagship, the communication ship USS Olympia, said to a group of reporters, I mean, the press corps was on his flagship, and said to the press corps, it was necessary for the U.S. to take defensive actions against enemy air fighters which come from the polar regions, fighters that are able to fly from one pole to the other with incredible speed. Did he, in fact, run into Averill? So there are some questions about the Holy Lands. Was there a Jesus? Was there a crucifixion? Was there a Longinus who pierced his side? Did the Spear of Longinus survive to this day? If so, where is it? And that concludes my presentation. Oh,